Good evening and welcome to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Budget and Finance Committee, and I'll call the meeting to order. I'm John Lebo, the Budget Chair. We do have a quorum this evening. Adoption of the agenda. Do I hear? So moved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Let's see. We do have an item here for public comments, and so state law RCWs 42-42.17a.555 does not allow the use of public facility to promote or oppose ballot measures. Promoting or opposing the city's levy lid lift ballot measure during a council meeting would be the use of a public facility in violation of state law. This includes comments made during the public comment section of a council meeting. The statute, however, does not limit your ability to support or oppose a ballot measure on your own time using your own resources. The committee is not accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the committee on agenda items. However, the committee may not respond to comments from the public if the comments are of a nature that the committee does not have influence or control over. Then the chair or presiding officer may request the speaker suspend their comments. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Do we have anyone for public comments?
There's no one in the public.
Okay. So we will close the public comment period, which brings us down to our budget director's report. I'll look to, let's see, Director Bond.
So I will give Matt a minute to pull up August. And since they just go from month to month, it just makes sense to do the most current ones. And as we walk through it, the operating percentage is 33.3. I do want to remind us all that it is a biennial budget, so it's 2025 and 26 of what we're looking at. So as we walk down the operating departments, the first thing is the Civil Service Commission. That is directly tied to police hiring, retiring, anybody that leaves. And as you know, there has been a lot of activity on that front. And so it's tracking a little bit higher than the 33.3%, but that makes sense because of the activity. On the crime watch, that basically there was supplies on the front end of the year, some community policing front supplies that were purchased. So that is a very small budget in itself, but just spent early in the year. So then walking down to dispatch, the third quarter it's always paid for early. So those quarterly payments, it's not going to properly trend as if like a regular operating budget, because you're paying for a quarter at a time. So that one constantly is probably going to look like that, a little bit in the yellow, just because of the way that we paid the invoices. And then going down to the engineering operations, that actually includes some transfers that are some annual transfers, and so that is just a little above the trajectory for being on target. Then going down to the executive line item, that there have been, as you've been brought along, there have been 2 negotiations this year as far as the police guild and currently within the Teamsters. And so the city contracts and has an attorney help navigate all of those negotiations, which then will be on target for the next 3 years. So that's trending a little bit on the higher side just at this moment. Facilities, yes, there have been a lot of issues with our buildings and that you've been brought along with. And so that was on the budget amendment, and during the mid-buy, some one-time emergency building issues that the city had no choice but to address immediately for health and safety reasons. And so that will be addressed as part of the mid-biennial budget adjustment. Walking down to the municipal services, there are some one-time items, and that's on some of these other ones too. Like insurance, we pay that once a year, it's January, it's gonna skew some of the numbers. There's some other items in there, like the laser fiche, that will be amended to within the municipal services budget. And then walking down to planning, this one's a little, this one is actually the climate element. So we have the money, we had to have that large increase in the professional services in order to capture what we were doing for the climate element. But however, we did receive a grant for that, so there's money coming in and money going out, so it's a pass through. However, that's all happening right now in the first year, so it isn't trending perfectly. Police, again, this item is on the budget, the upcoming budget amendment. This is actually a really easy conversation. It's the third party overtime. We are definitely did not budget that appropriately, but it's okay because we're being reimbursed for those costs. So it's revenue is coming in. We just need to increase the overtime expenditures to support those third party basically UW and some of the third party items that we do. So anyways, do you want me to pause or keep walking down just a moment?
We can pause for questions,
Mhm.
Councilman Bernie.
Thank you. For the third party overtime, when do you get reimbursed for those?
On a monthly basis.
Okay.
Yes, we are very timely. In fact, we submit those invoices. The police department is on that. The finance department at the beginning of every single year, we create the overtime, double time, those budgets. They're weighted. So in addition to being reimbursed, and I will explain what that means. So in addition to being reimbursed for like the wage, they're reimbursed for some of their, we call it the weighted or their wage. So benefits, because then it increases taxes. It's a whole payroll. It's not just overtime costs.
Sure.
So
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
are we? Is just checking if we're good. Okay, we're good. Okay, so the non-operating departments. So walking down, currently, the audit is at 0%. That being stated, we are starting quite a few audits at this point in time, so that's now on the finances plate. So that number probably starting in the next month or so, you will start to see an actual number within that instead of 0%. Community programs, that's at 29%. Elections is an annual. We pay that once a year. Emergency management, the lakefront property, and the memberships, those don't always trend at the beginning of the year. There's a lot that trend at the beginning of the year, but sometimes the annual memberships trend at different times within the year. And so that doesn't cause any concern, just as an FYI on that. Police technology, and then public health those are within where we would project. Keep walking, keep going.
Are there any questions? No? Okay.
Okay, revenue by fund, so these are pretty close, they are a little under. I'm not to a level of causing any concern from the finances perspective. So the capital improvement fund is at 32%. The main revenue source into that fund is real estate excise tax, 1. To be specific, the general fund is right at 33%. And so it's just under 33.3, again, not concerning at this time. The sewer utility revenue is right at 33%, and then the street fund is a little under. Some of the right of ways, the reason on that is some of the right of ways, even though we're following some of the trends, I'm not 100% sure if they will pick up and we will start receiving more revenue on the construction right of ways, or if that is a number that is trending down, something to keep an eye on. We're just gonna keep an eye on it. Surface water utility, that one is 34%. So again, all of these numbers actually show you how accurate we are with projecting. They're pretty on target with projecting the revenues. So then, walking down to the traffic safety fund, that's at 25%. And again, just a reminder on that one, we completed that and started receiving revenue very late in the year, and so we had to come up with a budgeted number. And so this one isn't, the revenue is a little lower than what we projected, but we weren't making those decisions based on data at that time, and so we did an educated guess, and we may need to have more of a discussion around that at the mid-buy. And then the transportation capital, that's real estate excise tax too, mainly as the revenue source, in addition to a lot of grants. That's where the roundabout, so it's gonna be the Transportation Improvement Board, the WASDOT grants. So for that project, that's why that is trending so low, is because those are reimbursement-based grants that are included in that budget, which will then change once that project actually starts and the city is reimbursed for those items. Do you think I think capital, I think we're just probably maybe best to hit a pause because we're gonna go into a bigger discussion a little later in the agenda on that, and I'm happy to circle back if during that discussion where we're walking through the CIP, if you have questions tying to the dashboard.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'll just give you a preparatory question. The paid to date, it varies by report. I assume that the latest one, August, would reflect the payments.
It's inclusive,
Um,
unless there's one that you're specifically pointing out.
if you look back in June, July, they don't seem to, that's close.
On the.
Extract, let's say.
Oh, designs,
There's
that's, yeah, that's because. Well, I can just answer that, actually,
Because
that's
I went-
because, one of them is design and one of them is construction. And we internally cannot figure out why Tableau is choosing which graphs to show and which ones not to show. And we have been trying to problem solve that for quite a few months and cannot figure out why it's doing that. And so that one of them is construction, which is showing that we haven't started construction, but then where there is something, the design is showing. Is that the question? Or is it not
That's
the
part of the question, I guess. Also going forward, maybe what we do is convert these two projects rather than phases of projects. So that if you look at it and you say, this project is X dollars and this is how much we've spent towards that project. Rather than, because otherwise you can't look at this and tell you what the project value is. And that's, so I would suggest that the council would be focused on the larger picture, which is what is the value of the project and how much should we pay out to pay? Rather than by things. Because you can't otherwise understand what the big picture is.
And I understand what you're saying. Maybe that opens, just to open a bigger discussion for, how to present it, because the dashboard is gonna be based on a budget year and a year, which the financials, and I see what you're saying, which is more along the lines of what is being presented in what will be presented in the CIP with the full project scope, like we discussed last week.
Maybe it's a larger, Councilmember Rotani and then Councilmember Riddle.
On point to your comment, I'm looking at the raw numbers that are on the back page of June through August, and it seems like the PPD is increasing, which is the right direction, so I think those numbers are accurate, so I think that you're right, the issue with the graph needs to be problem solved, or at least the actual numbers
Yes.
themselves work, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I do appreciate having design separated out from the construction, as there typically have been and probably will be separate contracts. So it's tracking each contract individually. And then we needed to sort of define the purpose for this graph versus like the CIP that we're going to be going into in a bit. So I think Chair Lebo, let's think about what purposes these each provide for us.
A good comment, so we'll think about.
And yeah, so if we walk down, then I'm going to the next page. Again, all of, you're looking at the graphs on the front, but all of the numbers are provided that populate all the graphs on the back. So if you wanted to look at the actual numbers and digest it through numbers and the percentages, all the information is on the back, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And then going into the revenue by line items, we've cherry picked these for items that we are just, for one reason or another, we are looking at them more specifically. So the business tax is tracking at 46%. The construction permits is at 35%. The motor vehicle excise tax, gas tax, that's at 30%. The mechanical and plumbing permits are at 43%. The passport revenue is at 42%. Real estate excise tax, I will take a minute to say that one I am very happy to see is trending at 44%. The sales and use tax is at 36%. And the traffic safety camera revenue is currently trending at 27%. And are there any questions on that?
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thanks. Regarding REIT, so my understanding is there's a change of ownership for town center. And do you have a sense for what the magnitude of REIT will be for that transaction?
I don't at this time because I don't at this time.
I can only posit that $60 million purchase. I don't remember what the rate is, so.
It's
It varies.
Now too. It's laddered too,
It
so it's up to a certain point. So if I recall correctly, my rough calculations, it would be 400-ish, but that's doing math on TV. She told me not to.
And yeah, I'd have to go look at the specific real estate excise tax reports that the city receives to see if that transaction has been completed, and I would October 1st. I would project through the numbers. It is not. I was gonna say, because it would. Yeah. So, you will definitely see through the numbers when it does.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to present on this, or are there any other questions from council members?
I will point out that internally we accidentally grabbed a number, so the traffic safety operations at the bottom of the operating departments, we were accidentally, that budget number was incorrect, not the number of the paid to date. So I do want to point out that on previous reports, that budget number isn't at 3,360,500. So that trend of 15% for the expenditures is going to be lower than what you've seen previously. Because of that. So, just pointing out very transparently. It was just the one line item for basically what we were paying directly for the traffic cameras. But then we were grabbing the full number for the department, what we were paying for, court staff time, police staff time. So it was not comparing apples to apples. We weren't taking the budget number and then presenting, so just being fully transparent there.
So I'm a little slow, so the numbers that you're showing for August are the correct.
Correct, they
So the
the-
ones for
budget were corrected,
corrected, so when it showed 9/12 in June and July, that
That
was
is-
incorrect.
that is
But
correct,
August is correct,
that is correct, and what it was,
budget and paid to take.
yeah, so the piece that wasn't being included, it was just. It was just the for what we paid at Vera Mobility was what was grabbed for the budget number, not including all of the staff time to the 2 years for the court, the police, and the inclusion of everything else being the transfers and all of that budget number that had been approved by council.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. So that'll bring us down to new business. The first one is 5A, investment report, government agency bonds, and Director Vaughn, I believe you're gonna present on that as well.
Absolutely.
Thank
So with that, there is a investment, just a one page. And showing where we're at with the investment report. So basically, the city has been able to implement exactly as the council and budget committee have approved in the strategy. So as you'll see, when you look down the line, there's a little under 50% of the city's cash has been invested through government agency bonds, which is what our policy states. The target is around 50%. We're currently at 46%, which I'm very comfortable with, knowing that we've got some projects coming up and some at the next year. And we have very successfully, basically, as you can see, invested about the 10 million in $1 million blocks, and it ladders to every 6 months. And so as you walk down, you can see that that we have been successful in doing that. And then the coupon rate is the yield or the interest rate that the city is receiving on each government agency bond. Definitely super sad to see the one mature. It just did, because boy, would I love
Almost
to have
5.
had that
Almost
locked in
5.
all the way down to 2030. However, that has not occurred. And so this point in time of when this, because the city did reinvest that at the end of the laddering in 2030. This is matching what's being produced with the August 31 presentation. So this is an August 2025 date stamp on this report.
Is that August 1 or August?
August 30, the end of August.
Keep going.
And so I just also kind of just walking through where we're at with August. The LGIP, that current interest rate is at 4.38%. Our bank's reserve interest rate is at 4.4%. And the likelihood that it's going to stay there by the end of the year is not projected through everything I'm hearing to stay there. We'll see over time if that drops, how that drops. So again, about over half of the city's cash funds are in what we define as a liquid investment, so we can pivot very quickly with those funds. This is a longer term strategy of investments laddering every 6 months. If the city gets into a situation where there's a cash flow or we're not complying with our 50% mark because the cash flow's gone down because of projects or whatever the case may be, then we are in a very excellent position by having this 6-month laddered structure. It's a very proactive position to be in. And just revisiting that per the policy, the way that we go about this, number one is always the safety of these bonds, the liquidity, and then the third item that we consider is the yield. So that's exactly in the format in which we, being City Administrator Hill and I, basically, when we presented these bonds, then we make that call through that.
Any questions, Councilmember Furtani?
Hi, thank you, Director Bond, for the great report, and yeah, I am sorry to see those interest rates go. I was just wondering if, how closely the federal funds rate that the Fed decides tracks with the kinds of bonds we buy.
It does. The one that we just purchased from at the end of 2030, that went down quite a bit. That interest rate or yield rate, coupon rate, you can interchange all of those. That language is about 3.5.
So given that they just cut their rate by a quarter point, and they're projected to do it twice more this year, that's not looking good for keeping high yields.
So these are all locked in. Everything in the government agency bonds, these are locked in, which creates such an excellent platform for finance, for budgeting, stability, predictability. I can tell you, as you can see on this report, for 25, 26, 27, 28, what interest rate the city will be receiving for this bucket of money. Where the variable comes in is the local government investment pool, the LGIP, and the city's bank reserve. So those both being over 4% right now, that could change drastically. However, the city has to have both. We have to have a liquid amount of money. We have to hold half of our funds or more in a very liquid fashion. Period. End of story, really. In order, we need both vehicles. This helps provide a longer term predictable of what we are able to receive, and we're allowing our money to make money for us, which is I get really excited about this. Such an excellent thing, because it's the only thing this city does that actually increases the fund balance to every single fund. We constantly sit here and talk about the colors of money and how you can't use this color with that color because it's against the rules. And this is like, it gets to play with everything. It gets to go into each fund. And so that's the really exciting part about the investment side of. And I will stop because I know we have another item to get to.
I just wanted to commend the city, basically, the careful stewardship of this money and the fact that we did change the investment policy to allow us to do this. We got to take advantage of these high rates while they were there, so that's great.
So for the benefit of others, when you look at, for example, fiscal year 2025, that represents the total investment of 10.1 million, right? And that's the interest recovered off that value on fiscal year 2025. So that's the estimated value of interest for 2025.
Yes.
366.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So when you look at 2026, because there's another tranche of bonds to be purchased, you haven't yet estimated the interest rate to be received, or interest income to be received off that new tranche.
Correct. So you're right.
So when we look at, for example, fiscal year 2026, it will increase. It's just a matter of how much, because the interest or yield or coupon rate will be greater than 0.
Right. So that basically that $1 million block of money that matured on 9/5 this month within September. That $1 million block of money that matured now is going to go down to 2030 and create interest for the city through the end of August. 8/31 is the new maturity date on through 2030 at a 3.5% interest, which by the end of this year might be. So, and this is where you just have to keep with the strategy, and one will be paying off. So you're either your liquid is having a higher interest rate, or your long term, but your long term, as far as from a financial standpoint from your finance department, this is excellent because I can plan for this money. I know for sure the city will receive this dollar amount. So then this is very, these are funds that I can use to budget and match expenditures against, which is the liquid portion. I have to estimate and predict very cautiously. So that's the difference from my standpoint.
It's just for the benefit of others, that when they look at fiscal year 2025, that's the amount of money that you'll generate from the $10.1 million. Fiscal year 2026, it will be some amount greater than the 301,000, because we haven't yet calculated the interest off the next tranche,
Yes,
$1 million.
not just for 2026, but
It will carry through.
yes, 26 carried through to 2030. So every single year from 26 forward, and it will increase.
Yeah. Any questions? Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's essentially free money for the city. I do have two quick questions. Are any of these agency bonds callable?
No,
Good, because in an environment where interest rates are falling, callable bonds are extra risky.
no.
And second, do you know what happened with the Fannie Mae, that's number 3 that has like half the interest rate of the others?
That was just at the time of the purchase, that was the going rate. And so we, again, back to not paying attention to the yields, adopting the strategy and sticking to the strategy. And some bonds you're gonna purchase at almost 4.875, and you're gonna get really excited, and other ones are not gonna be as excitable in the sense of 1.87. So that right now, that bond, technically, if it was invested, wouldn't be making as much money as what's in the liquid. However, that being said, by the end of this year, that could be a completely different story. So it just, instead of paying attention to that, you just have to go with the strategy, own the strategy, and know that one bucket of your money will be working maybe a little harder for you. Then I mean, but you need both. We have to have both, it just in order to function.
Right, that makes sense, and I agree, with this bond ladder being as emotionless as possible, just to say we're not chasing yield, we're chasing what's essentially free money at whatever the market rate happens to be.
We're chasing the strategy and just implementing the adopted budget and finance committee strategy, and keeping it moving forward, because this will continue to, again, it's very predictable, and that's having half of your cash flow be that predictable. It just has a lot of benefits.
Thank you. With that, that'll bring us down to the next item, which is 5B, the capital improvement plan update. And then I think City Administrator Hill will present for us.
Thank you, Chair. You'll see it when it comes up on the screen. There's supposed to be quarterly reports to you. Obviously, we missed the last quarter and we're kind of in between right now. So I did this as of September 11th, just because there was so much action at the last council meeting that affected the CIP. So we'll walk through this and stop me if you have any questions. Obviously 40th Place roundabout design is complete, so those are the values. Director Vaughn's report will at some point in the near future report to you what the final paid to date on design was. 40th Place roundabout construction, that represents everything that was approved last Thursday night. That is looking to begin early 2026, so you won't see any movement on that. You'll see that secured funding, the forecast and the budget amount are all equal because all those dollars are in place. The one thing that trails on that whole project obviously is schedule, but funding and budget target. The L90 culvert is in the same boat as far as schedule. That has been kicked down the road many times. No pun intended, because of our waiting on WashDOT and their project. Originally, we were thinking we could do these two projects together. WashDOT kept delaying theirs. Finally, they started to move forward again. They caught up past us and were ready to go sooner. We didn't want to close both roads at the same time and be in each other's way. So we thought it was best for the community to tie the two designs together so that they had a place where they actually came together and designed and have WashDOT leave as something that we can tie into in the future when we do our project next year. So as far as construction schedule, it would start about the same time, just because of fish windows and everything like that, as the WashDOT project has done. And obviously, when you look, so design has its budget. You will note that the budget and secured funding exceeds the forecast. That's because at a point in not too distant past, council made the decision to pull the L80 culvert out of that project, so it is just L90. So that's the difference there. And then obviously there's no budget at this point in time for L90 culvert construction because that has not gone up to bid yet. Going up to bid, and I have to check with Katie on when that will occur. I would assume next spring, early January, February, somewhere in that to get the best bidding time frame. Lakefront Park design that's going on right now, as you know. We've got an update coming in October from Corey and Amber. And design is anticipated to be completed in January of 26. They're going through all the permitting processes right now. That one is on time and on budget. So it's nice to have green all the way across there. And then we will get that advertised for construction, just as an update. In case anybody forgot or anybody listening online, as part of the King County Parks Levy, we secured as a city another $4 million for the construction of this park in the last legislative session. We're allocated another $1 million towards this, and then we do have a federal request in to help cover the rest of the costs for the community center. We won't go for the full meal deal on that one. So we should know by the end of this year if that survives that budget process. So stay tuned. Both Cantwell and Jaya Paul, well, all of our representatives and senators are in support of that project. So it'll be up to House and Senate to see what they do with that. And you'll remember too, if we didn't get that funding, we could either do a lesser community center. We also were awarded almost 1.3 million out of the 1.6 million in grant reimbursement through CFT for the Rose property. So those funds will be going back into that pot of money. So we would have some options if federal dollars didn't come into the mix. And Lindsay would probably be happy because that will trigger a single federal financial audit because of the dollar amount being over
We love those.
$700,000. So,
Get increased.
oh, did it increase to $1 million? Well, we're asking for significantly more than that. I think 3 million is what we're asking for. So, material bin covers. So obviously design's complete. Construction is ongoing. You remember we had possible contamination that was found not to be the case. So we didn't have to do remediation. But then we got into unstable soils because at some point they used that area as a mini landfill, had to be over excavated. And so there'll be as part of the upcoming mid-buy, there'll be some change orders coming forward on that project. And that has been delayed a little bit longer. It's supposed to be completed this month. It looks like it'll be now completed in October. Last week, there was some steel ordering problems that they had run into, so I don't have an update on that, but now we're thinking October for that project. The next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects highlighted, were on the consent calendar last week, and you close those projects out, they're complete. No mechanics liens, nobody's made any claims against the projects, so through the consent calendar, you took action to close out those projects, so those will drop off of this report as your next review. Beach Drive Lift Station is currently in design. This is taking us to 30% design. The 225,000 does not recognize the future action of adding $30,000 for that additional work for the side sewers. Once that is approved by council, you'll then see that reflected on this report. So that's not there just yet. The question was asked last week or so about that work. That won't increase the cost of the contract. That was anticipated in the future design of the project. It just, as was reported to you by Katie, made more sense to bring that work forward with all the unknowns, especially I think it was depth that they needed to know to make this work. And EV chargers are on hold. Director Dickinson is working on that to bring that back to council for a path forward, identifying the draw for the EV chargers or the new HVAC system to wire the whole building, the new panel that we need, and then the generator that we would need. So the next time we have a bomb cyclone, we can stay warm in City Hall. We'll invite people here to charge their devices. We don't almost crash the system, burn up wall plugs, and they sit here in the cold. Yeah, surge protectors, and they sit here in the cold while they try and charge it. It doesn't work very good as a warming station. And then grade separated crossing, I talked to Katie, and we will be bringing 30% design forward to you in October. So that report will be brought forward. Completion. We'll decide what next steps are then. Questions on the
Thank you.
CIP?
Or any questions? Councilmember Bertani and then Councilmember.
Thank you, Administrator Hill. It's a clear report as always. One of the questions I had was just to be clear, the L90 culvert is the one under 185th.
Correct.
And then the L80 culvert is the one that's under the south side of the intersection of 35th. Correct, okay. And so now the timing seems like the roundabout construction will kind of coincide with the L90 culvert construction, then?
Yeah, very potentially. Okay. The roundabout doesn't meet the same schedule. Actually, roundabout will proceed. It will begin construction before, and that's some timing that we're gonna have to look at. Because you won't have a full shutdown with the roundabout. But you will have a full shutdown at some point on 185th. And so we just want to look at, how that all works together with detours. So.
Great, okay, so you're on top of that, thank you.
Councilmember McCray.
Thank you. With the EV chargers design and then the upgrades to the building and all that, what is the anticipated timeline to discuss that? I know there's still a lot of lifting to do, but.
I would have to ask our public works director.
Okay.
Fortunately, she's out of town until she'll be back next Wednesday, so I will check in with her and see where she is with that. Just a reminder, she's also being our public works superintendent at this point in time, so. Yeah, I don't know how far she's gotten. I know she had a lot of requests for pricing, et cetera. Some evaluation going on. I know she's been in touch with SCL to find out. So we know, kind of get some pricing on the transformer on the pole outside City Hall. So she's working on it, but I can tell you where she is effective.
Okay, I know.
I know she's shooting for this fall.
For
Fall's
fall.
here, yeah.
Cool,
So
yeah,
Just
we don't
just
want
around the corner.
you guys to be told.
Yeah.
So.
Lindsay bought everybody in City Hall little gloves and we wore coats, and Elizabeth with warm hands let the gloves go elsewhere. So,
Fingerless gloves,
so you
and
can
gloves.
Aren't you guys
So you can-
spoiled?
right? I mean, it was Dollar General gloves, but.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lebo. Just quickly on the 20th Street culvert, the project is completed. Just to let council know, since Rebecca is not here tonight, Director Dickinson, that we've had some issues with adjacent homeowner continuing to potentially cause issues. So we had to deal with that today and yesterday. So council needs to be informed that we're gonna have ongoing challenges from that upslope property that originally precipitated a bunch of issues. So keep you informed. It was, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, since you brought that project up, something that I should have covered is a reminder that this was a temporary fix.
Yeah.
This gives us a 5-year window, so there was a lot of design. Department of
Fish and Wildlife, yeah.
is going to be involved in this, and so this was a temporary fix. They allowed us to keep the street open. There's wing walls, there's a lot of design work that has to be done, but we have 5 years to complete that, so you will see this project, when it comes back, it's not because it was poorly done. It's because it was done, so it's a Band-Aid to a real project.
Yeah, and I can assure you all that if it's discovered that the property owner helped precipitate the issues that occurred the last 2 days, that will be paying for the remediation that had happened. We will recoup the costs for sure.
What did they do?
That's for
I know.
okay. Want to keep us focused on that. Thank you for the comment. Did I see?
Okay.
You're good. Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, thanks for the report. So there have been a few projects where the schedule has slipped. Is there any risk that we might lose grant money if the project slips too much?
Is there one particular you're looking at?
Just in general, like, are there any projects where there's a concern about meeting grant deadlines?
No, I mean, L90 is in a good place. The 40th place roundabout. As you know, we had some deadlines that we had to meet before this past weekend. Those have been met now. Construction just needs to be begun before July 1st of next year. That's I think TIB and some Public Works Board dollars that hinge on that. So as long as we begin construction, which we are anticipating beginning long before July 1st, so I don't see any problems there. Material bins, I think that's all paid for internally. Lift station, we're paying for that ourselves. Grade separated crossing, those funds are secured, basically done there, so now I don't see it causes us to lose funding.
Thank you for the presentation. There's a couple things. Maybe I just was drifting off if I follow. On the L90, wouldn't the budget be the same as your forecast, or do you have a different budget? Right now it shows as gray. Is there a reason why?
L90.
Yeah, for the construction phase.
In the past, we haven't filled that in until council approves the budget. So that's why we felt that out, I think. Yeah, budget is, it's down in the notes, budget is that approved by council through mayor signing authority, since we have no approval. We've looked at that as a forecast. We're forecasting it'll be $3 million. The secured funding is what is in the fund. I have to go back, so check, make sure we're accurate. Yeah, but the budget is what council approves ultimately, because that, as you saw with the roundabout, could vary based on how bids come in. So since we've been doing this report, that's how it's been presented.
And but since we don't have, on that particular one, we don't have a budget when we look at the funding, which is less than forecast, would that still be green or would that be yellow? Because the idea is to say, we're on target or we're not quite on target. And if our forecast is higher than our security funding, wouldn't that be yellow?
Let me go back and take a look at those numbers. We'll have to confirm the accuracy of those two numbers.
Okay, and then under the material bins where we're showing a higher forecast than a secured funding, wouldn't we also be yellow on our budget and our funding? Because our target was the 530, and if we're thinking of 600, then we're not meeting our target.
So forecast was what we had anticipated, budget that was approved, matches the secured funding. So the forecast was, I believe the engineer, either the engineer's estimate, it says down here.
The forecast would represent, well, in
That's
my
what we were-
experience, the forecast represents the estimated cost at completion.
Yeah, I think we were looking at this when we put this together as the forecast, just like with the L90, forecasting what we believe the project's going to cost based on engineers' estimates. So that 600,000 would have been what we thought it was gonna cost. See if we can come up with a better way to represent that. for you.
Yeah, and so in my experience, it would be the forecast represents the estimated cost at completion.
Okay,
Cause that says that's how much we think we're gonna spend, and the forecast goes up and down depending upon whether or not your bids are more or less than what you thought, or if your change order
Mhm.
are more or less than what you think. So.
okay. Would you want to, well, I'm just thinking out loud, but the forecast could be like for the L90 culvert construction. An engineer's estimate, so that as we're having these discussions, you know, we can look at that and say, you know, there is a delta.
Yeah,
We need to increase funding, but then have that. That would at some point change in
Yeah.
time to what we anticipate at build out.
I'll send you an example.
Okay,
But the intended of the forecast is, this is what we think it's gonna cost. At whatever where we are, so. The rule of thumb I give my staff is that the forecast is what you think it's gonna cost at the end of the
At the end of
project
the day.
today. Tomorrow, if the forecast changes because some event occurs, a change order or whatever, then you redo the forecast. And the forecast just gets reflected as to what you believe to be
you're gonna have,
where you're gonna head. And then you can match it up against your original budget. We're under the road.
yeah, send that to me.
Let's get it. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you. Yep. That'll bring us to the end of our budget finance committee. Yes, member for Tiny.
We're gonna make it somewhat point comment. I just wanted to commend the finance department on the GFOA award that I saw announced on the city website. So congratulations.
I will extend that to my entire team, because it definitely takes a team. It takes council, it takes every department head, it takes everybody in the city that participates in order to get that to where it needs to be. So thank you.
So picking up on Councilmember Bertani's, just one more thing. You mentioned the Rose property reimbursement of $1.3 million.
It's just under 1.3.
And that was the anticipated.
Yes, yeah, we got the full request. It's 75%. We were able to roll some of our costs for staff as well as the appraisals into it. So we got a little bit more money than we had anticipated. Yeah. we did
That's a
that.
great result.
Yes, yeah.
So the cost to the city of Lake Forest Park taxpayers directly is the difference between
Just a little over $300,000 out of that funds.
Oh.
That was,
Yeah, that's. Let's do another one.
So with that, I think we're adjourned.
Don't go anywhere. You got another meeting.
Oh, Same bad time, same bad channel, right?